Today I'm going to be showing you how I painted and weathered this Sd.Kfz.250/9 half track by Dragon in 1/35 scale. As you can see, the vehicle is finished in a late war style of tricolor German camouflage pattern, and this is a full weathering tutorial, so we're going to go through the entire process step by step of finishing this vehicle. We'll start with painting the camouflage, then we'll look at creating abrasion effects on the field applied camo. We'll cover application of the decals, and then we'll go into the weathering process, including chipping effects, accentuating details with an oil pin wash, creating some fading and color modulation with oil paints, and of course all of the dust and earth and mud effects. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get started. To begin, I have the model prepared for painting, and it is disassembled in as many pieces as is convenient. I've also pre-painted the interior with a dark shadow black-brown color. I didn't put too much effort there because you can barely see any of that in the end. Let's start with the base color application. To begin, I'm going to pre-paint some areas with Tamiya LP18 Dull Red, thinned with Mr. Color Leveling Thinner. Nowadays, I would actually paint the model entirely with a red primer base color, using a real primer product. I painted this model about 2.5 years ago. At the time, I wasn't super big on primer, so what I'm actually going for here is some red primer left exposed in inaccessible places on the vehicle, such as behind the running gear and suspension. Alright, now for the real base color, we're going to use AK Real Color Dunkelgelb. Again, thinned with Mr. Color Leveling Thinner. I've thinned it about 70% thinner, 30% paint, and I go in and build up the application in a few thin passes, the usual techniques. And you can see here, like I said before, I'm leaving the red base color that I applied exposed in a few areas, the running gear, behind the wheels, and so on. Not everywhere, but this will peek through in a couple spots in the end and will add some interest to the vehicle. Now we're going to do the first round of decal applications. Mainly what I'm focusing on here are stencils and the license plates and other things that would be applied before the vehicle had the field applied camouflage applied. I soak the decals in some warm water for about 90 seconds, apply them to the surface, and then I apply microsol to soften them. You'll note that I do not apply a gloss varnish. If you apply enough decal softener and you have good quality decals like these kit decals from Cartograph, you don't need the gloss surface. The decals will adhere properly and they won't silver. Just apply microsol. I also did a little bit of detail painting of the rubber of the road wheels using AK 3rd Generation Rubber Black, and I painted the rollers on the drive sprocket with AK 3rd Generation Gunmetal. Alright, so the vehicle is kind of as it would leave the factory somewhat, super factory fresh, and you can see a bit of a glossy sheen on there. That's because I applied a coat of hairspray to the model. I want to apply hairspray chipping techniques for the field applied camouflage. For the camouflage, we're going to use the two remaining colors of the tricolor camouflage, which is olive green and rot brown. Again, AK Real Colors. And again, thin with Mr. Color Leveling Thinner because this makes them spray much more smoothly. And we're going to be using the Badger Renegade Chrome airbrush again. When it comes to painting a fine camouflage like this, you have to go with an even thinner mix of paint, as in more thinner, less paint, compared to what we did for the base color applications. Along with the thinner mix, I'm also spraying at a lower pressure. Another trick when it comes to painting a multicolor camouflage pattern is to give yourself breathing space in the pattern. When I applied the green, I made it comfortable. I left enough space that I can go in with the red and not feel squeezed out, because I want the pattern's shapes to be kind of like natural and look not forced. So I applied the green with lots of free space. Then I go in with the red and paint the shapes how I like. And then I can go back in with more green afterwards and tighten up the gaps and make the pattern look like it's more appropriate. Then I can go with more red afterwards. You can go back and forth. There's no reason you have to apply all of one color at once. This way the camouflage pattern is less stressful. You can kind of plan it out as you go. You have more freedom this way, let's say. I recently did a video just on painting tricolor camouflage. I'll link that in the upper corner for you guys. Now within about, I'd say 15 minutes of finishing the application of the paint, I want to activate the hairspray and initiate the hairspray chipping process. So if you remember, before I applied the green and the red, I applied thin coat of hairspray with a spray can. Now we're making use of that. Hairspray is water soluble, so I can take a brush that is lightly damp with water and begin to abrade the edges of places where I want to add wear and tear to the field applied camouflage colors of red and green, and expose the underlying base color of yellow that the vehicle would have been just painted in the factory. I can also use a toothpick here to carefully add some scrapes and scratches to the camouflage colors as well. I did a bit more detail painting here. I did some dry brushing on the guns with some reddish grays and light grays, picking out some details. We'll work on that later with a wash. I've also painted the tools at this point, using buff for the wood and basalt gray for the metal ends. And don't forget the white tips of the width indicators. With our field applied camouflage now on the model, I also decided to now apply the unit's markings, which will be applied in conjunction with their unit camouflage. This was exactly the same process as the previous layer of decals, just on top of the camo instead of before it. And here's our model painted and ready for weathering. As you can see, we are camouflage applied with some abrasion integrating to it already, thanks to hairspray chipping. And the underlying stencil markings kind of coming in and out of the camouflage pattern add some nice layering effects to the vehicle, and I really like that. It's a nice storytelling element. With the camo and decals applied, now we can begin the real weathering process. I want to apply some more controlled chipping effects to the model. For this, we're going to use some AK 3rd Gen acrylics, namely Buff and Saddle Brown. The Buff will be used as a highlight scrape, Saddle Brown for red primer. I'm also going to use some paint retarder from VMS to thin the paints and make it easier to paint fine scratches. I've also got some tap water for thinning the paints and a fine 20/0 brush for painting little scrapes and scratches. Now my plan here is I want to work with the previous abrasion we did with the hairspray, and that previous abrasion was wear and tear onto the camouflage colors of green and red. But I want to now work with that and paint deeper scratches and damage into the actual yellow base color of the vehicle. So I start with the buff paint, and I paint little scrapes and scratches and highlight edges, mainly focusing on areas that would see wear and tear due to 1. Crew walking around, 2. The crew accessing hatches and compartments with their hands, and 3. Environmental damage of the vehicle going through brush, essentially. That's what I'm doing on the sides here. With thin acrylic paint, a fine brush, and the paint retarder, that combination helps you paint very thin little scrapes and scratches, which looks very realistic. With the first round of scratches applied, now I switch to the saddle brown color, and I can paint deeper areas of wear and tear where the underlying exposed red primer might be showing through. This is very refined. I pick maybe, 1 in 20 scrapes and give it a little bit of red primer. Most of this chipping effect will be just the lighter buff color exposed on edges and so on. This will be toned down later by the washes and dust effects as well, so don't be afraid to go a little over the top, but it's all up to your style and how you think the model should look. Let's take a look at the finished chipping effects in the model. As you can see, it's working hand in hand with the previous abrasion of the field applied camo, but we've emphasized the crew's access in the vehicle, the crew's handling of the gun controls in other areas like in the crew compartment, and thirdly, the vehicle actually going through the environment and scraping up against bushes and so on. And keep in mind this will be toned down with later weathering effects. Next up, we're going to be applying a wash to the model, which is my favorite weathering effect. To prepare the surface, I'm going to apply a coat of satin varnish from VMS to provide a smooth surface finish. The smooth finish will help the wash collect in the crevices and flow nicely around details where we want it. As you can see, the model has a bit of a sheen from the satin finish, but it's not super glossy. For the wash itself, I'm going to use the MIG Ammo Africa Core wash. This is a dark brown color, which is good on any base color yellow vehicle. Additionally, I have some enamel thinner for cleaning up excess wash. I'm also going to use this dark gray oil paint, Abteilung Smoke, for my own custom wash on the guns where I need a darker color. I begin with the Africa Core wash, straight from the bottle, applied with a thin brush to all the details on the surface. Now remember, before this I airbrushed on the satin varnish, which is a key aspect of this. You need a smoother finish on the model than the matte bare acrylic paint we airbrushed. And the smoother finish allows these paints to flow naturally and collect in the crevices. This effect kind of has two results which work hand in hand. By using a darker color and applying it, that creates a combination of grime and shadow, which, like I said, work hand in hand and make the details pop out, make the model look a little larger than life, and also make it look just a little bit dirty. I pick out all the details, which can be raised lines, weld lines, panel gaps, bolts, rivets, everything that can and should have grime or a shadow gets a light pass with the wash. If you're not a fan of the pre-made enamel washes, or you just want to make your own custom color, you can instead thin down an oil paint with the same enamel thinner, and you can apply this the exact same way. In this case, I mixed up a darker color for the guns because dark brown isn't going to look good on gray. And the same effect, I'm just making the details pop out, make them look a little dirty, and that kind of works well with that dry brushing we did earlier on the guns. Here's the wash applied, and looks pretty good, but there's always going to be a few spots where there's some excess wash you don't like. It can be pooling or brush marks, tide marks. And the beauty of using an enamel or an oil paint for the wash is that you can reactivate it later and wipe away any excess you don't like. You just need a little bit of the same enamel thinner. Again, don't use acrylic thinner, use enamel thinner. Acrylic thinner will strip the paint off your model for the camouflage, which you don't want to do. And there we go. The wash is applied, and now the model just, in my opinion, looks so much better than it did beforehand. It's hard to describe, but if you're going to apply just a single weathering effect on the model, it should be a wash, because this is what makes the model look not like a model and more like a real vehicle, because the details are so much more apparent. Next up, I'm going to use some more oil paints to create some color modulation, fading, and dust effects. I have a lighter red and green for fading of the camouflage and for panel line demarcations. I also have dust and starship filth here for some more earthy, dusty, grimy effects on the model. And I have a oil paint thinner here from VMS, which will help us blend the paint and produce a matte finish. So these are Ammo's oil brushers, which I don't use the applicators to apply the model because it's too big. So I actually apply them to a palette and then apply them with a fine brush for more control. I begin with the lighter green and lighter red colors, and I'm doing an effect here which is kind of like filtering, kind of like color modulation. I'm going to have to explain it as we go along because it might not make sense to some people. Essentially, I'm applying this as a filter to bring out some highlights and demarcation between panel lines of the camouflage. This is a stylistic thing. You don't have to do this. You can ignore this step. You can also do color modulation during the airbrushing phase, but I prefer oil paints for more control. After I apply the highlights, I then dry blend them with this little stencil brush here, just kind of smearing it around and blending out the oil paints. Because they dry really slowly, you can move them around with a dry brush like this, and it actually kind of blends the edges very nicely and creates that kind of filter effect. I only did it in a few spots this model, just picking out panels and doors and gaps. It's pretty subtle, but I kind of like how it looks on the model. Again, stylistic. You can ignore it if you don't like it. Now for some dust and dirt and grime effects, I'm going to do essentially the same technique but with different colors here. Now I'm using that Starship Filth and the dust color, which is like a dark brown and a lighter tan color. And I apply them. This is kind of like the same thing, but since the colors are different, it produces a different effect. Instead of color modulation or fading, it's like dust accumulations and grime and so on. So I'm applying it with a brush, and then once again blending it with dry with this little stumpy stencil brush. And you can see how it basically makes the model look like it's had dust and dirt and grime accumulate on it during a road march or just from the crew walking along the surface. On angled surfaces, I don't blend it with that stippling motion. Instead, I blend it with a streaking motion, and that produces a sort of rain mark effect, simulating the dust and grime being washed down by rain. Oil paints are a very useful tool in your modeling toolbox because they have a very slow drying time and they can be easily blended. That's why we used them for the wash effect earlier on the gun barrels, and the same products here, just different colors, can be used to create color modulation effects, fading, dust, dirt, grime, streaking effects. A very limited palette of colors, and I can make a nice looking model here with a layering and different applications, and I'm very happy with it. Another way to apply oil paints is to use what we call the speckling technique, where you flick it on with a toothpick and a paintbrush, and that can simulate some spatter from the running gear collecting on the lower areas of the vehicle. When it comes to speckling, make sure you don't have a ton of paint on your brush. You don't want to spray it everywhere. You want a little bit of paint, and you can build it up slowly and have more control. And here's the model with the completed oil filters, color modulation, and earth effects. And I think it looks pretty good. Again, the stylistic thing I did with the color modulation is subtle and it's a personal preference, but you can see that poking through in variations in the green and the reds between panels here and there. More importantly is the accumulations of dust and earth and grime with the dust and Starship Filth colors, as well as the speckling effects. Let's work on that more with the running gear. For the running gear, I've already painted the tracks beforehand, just roughly with a beigey gray color and rubber on the pads. I also already applied the wash to the wheels. We covered that a few steps ago. I'm going to use the same kind of effects here and the same tools, but instead of the dust colored oil paint, I'm going to use Starship Filth and a dust colored texture paste. I start with the application of the texture paste in only a few areas of the running gear here because I don't want a ton of built up mud. That looks a little unrealistic. This texture paste by MIG Ammo is an enamel effect, so we can blend it with enamel thinner in the same way we did for the wash and so on. And that can be used to wipe away excess, knock down the texture if we want to. Just the usual blending of enamel effects, right? After that had dried for a few hours, I then took the Starship Filth dark brown oil paint we used previously And this is the color I wanted for the majority of the muddy, earthy effects in the model. So I basically covered up all the texture paste and other areas with a thicker application of this oil paint. And then once again, I am dry blending it with my little stumpy brush here. There's no thinner required because the oil paint dries slowly, so I can stump and stipple and streak with this little short bristled brush and blend the effect to my liking. And it goes hand in hand with the wash that was already on the details there after all. And now we see the return of the speckling technique once again. Exactly the same as I showed on the hull. I take some of the dark brown Starship Filth oil paint and I am flicking it on carefully with a toothpick and a fine brush. Again, carefully. If you have a big brush and you're doing this with a lot of paint, it can fly everywhere. You want a small brush and a little bit of paint and build it up in a controlled way. And few things make a convincing earth texture as good as the speckling technique. It looks really good and it's really easy. With just the texture paste and one color of oil paint and a few different styles of application, we've achieved some very nice and easy earth effects in the model, and that's all we need to do. For the tracks, it was even simpler. I started with a heavy application of the same Starship Filth oil paint, just like a heavy, thick wash over the whole surface, because I'm going for a little bit more of a muddy look on this vehicle, autumn 1944. And then I mixed up a mid-tone speckling color, half and half dust and Starship Filth, and speckled that on the tracks to give a little bit of texture. I did the half and half mix to lighten it a little bit, and that way it would actually show up over top of that dark wash. And there we go. That's all I did on the tracks, a wash and speckling, and once again the speckling technique really carries that effect. It produces a very nice texture. At this point we have just the finishing touches to go. So first of all, I'm going to apply a final matte varnish on the model, again from VMS. I love their varnishes. This will protect all of our weathering effects and also unify everything with a nice realistic matte finish and get rid of any sheen from the satin varnish, any oil paint sheen, and so on. Our final thing to deal with on the model is the rear view mirror. And for this I'm going to use a Molotow liquid chrome marker. I am simply going to apply this straight from the marker carefully, and I'm dealing with this after the varnish because I don't want to apply a varnish over this surface finish and potentially ruin it. I want it to stay shiny. The matte varnish might make it look not shiny. And with that, the model is complete, and I am very pleased with the result. Hope you guys liked the result too and enjoyed the video and maybe picked up a couple of tips and tricks. I'm very pleased with the look of my late 1944 style finish here with the kind of like dark camouflage, mostly red and green, a little yellow showing between the gaps, and also like the low visibility stencil markings. This is in my mind what a late 1944 vehicle should look like. Additionally, the earth effects I'm very pleased with. I am succeeding in using fewer and fewer products each time and getting more and more efficient with the application using more techniques, less products. I'm happy with that. Anyways, if you guys have any questions or comments, please post them on below. I always read through them all and I'm happy to help you guys out. This project will return in another video in the future on a diorama with this Jagdpanzer IV. Until then, if you like my work, you can support me for just $1 a month on Patreon. That really helps me making these videos. And I will see you guys next time. Stay safe and happy modeling.